You say in this article that we can learn a lesson from apologetics in terms of how we go about defending the sanctity of marriage.
Absolutely. I mean, I live up here in Seattle, and we just went through this debate at the state level in Washington about, how is the state going to define marriage? We lost it. It is, traditionalists and Christians lost the debate, and in fact, within a couple of months, the governor called for the legislature to pass a bill and give it to her, and she'd sign it. That all happened before Christians even really had a chance to figure out, okay, what are we going to say? And one of the only things that anybody was saying was a prominent pastor here. I won't give his name. He's a good guy, but he was on a lot of radio programs saying God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And this was, first of all, it's not even really a biblical argument. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek argument. Maybe that's okay in some settings. But, guess what? Nobody's persuaded by that argument. But even if, we're sort of called on to make a defense for the institution of marriage, I often ask Christian audiences, you're in an elevator, a sort of secular liberal asks you, why should the state recognize marriages between a man and a woman? What would you say? Most people either don't know what to do, or they think, well, I will talk about Genesis 1, or I'll talk about what marriage means in the Bible. Well, we ought to see why that's a problem. We know that if we were doing apologetics, if you're trying to persuade somebody that say God exists, you don't start by saying, well, it says right here in the Bible that God exists. We recognize, if it's going to be a good apologetic argument, what you do is you appeal to something that the person already believes or has reason to believe is true, and then you show them that, in fact, if they're consistent, it should lead to belief in God in this case. That's just good apologetics. You don't appeal to something people don't believe. You appeal to something that they already think is true, and then you bring them along. Same thing is true when it comes to marriage. We need to make public arguments in defense of marriage, but most of us just don't know how to do that. We think the best we can do is maybe cite Scripture and say, well, I as a Christian believe this is what marriage is. That's fine if you're just called upon to ask what your opinion is. But if we want to say the state and society should recognize marriages between man and woman, we've got to provide public arguments for that particular position.
And that's one of the things you do in the article. You make a case for the benefits of marriage.
That's right. I mean, that's kind of the easiest thing to do, and a lot of people do that. I just, call that the utilitarian or pragmatic arguments. We've got thousands of social scientific studies that show, basically that marriage is good for us. Yeah, some people are called to singleness. There are some marriages that are dysfunctional, but on balance, people that are called to marriage are better off in almost any metric. If you talk about the sort of economic welfare, their psychological health, their sort of attention, their susceptibility to stress, just, their criminality, almost anything you could think of to measure in a sort of social science study, people are better off married rather than divorced, and that's just something we know. And so that's the kind of first and easiest thing we can do is make these really consequentialist arguments that marriage is good for us. It's good not just for the people that are married in general, but it's good for children, for instance, that are, we know that on almost any measure, children are better off if they're raised in a home that have their mother and their father married to each other. And so that's something that's, it's really, at this point, it's indisputable. We've had to have about 40 years of experience and experiments with this particular question, and we know that in general, marriage is good for us and divorce is not.